Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out.
Welcome back, man. No, I know nothing about the stroke thing. We were just talking before. So at the time of recording, Damar Hamlin, I believe, is out of the hospital. For those who don't know, he, I guess, suffered cardiac arrest, I think was the official diagnosis. He's a NFL player, plays for the Bills. So Chris and I have been talking about a variety of things we've seen, and then I think shortly after, a basketball player for ODU collapsed on the court, and obviously the Christian Eriksen thing at the Euros last or 2 summers ago now, maybe. Anyway, so we've just been talking, and then Chris said, have you heard about the stroke thing? And the answer was no, and I was like, let's just go ahead and get started. So here we are.
It's a good intro.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the stroke thing, thank you for having me back, by the way.
Of course.
Very excited.
Your book is out on Amazon. Go buy it. What the heck is a clinical trial? Go buy it.
Yeah, hopefully, if you need it, it's a good layman's introduction to what a clinical trial is and how you could go about finding one for yourself, given that you probably aren't given all the information you need. So anyway, yeah. So the stroke thing is, just to jump right into it. Today is what, Monday the 16th?
Yep.
So this previous Friday, I think it was either the FDA, I think, dropped a note about their bivalent booster that they might have detected a safety signal for strokes in people who are 65 or older, right? And they dropped this information on a Friday.
What does a signal mean?
Like they were concerned that there might be some safety event, right? Like so like they do like safety monitoring, right? So like they roll out these vaccines. They're supposed to have a number of different safety monitoring systems in place that are kind of looking for things that develop on the fly, right? Now, whether they're going to listen to the signals is a different thing, which we'll probably touch on, right? Like there was evidence of the myocarditis signal early that was clearly ignored. But this is sort of that in reverse, right? So they came out and they said, hey, we saw something that kind of maybe looks like a safety signal. It only showed up in one of our data sets. So they have kind of multiple ways that they're monitoring it. So they said it didn't show up in our global data set. It didn't show up in our Veterans Affairs data set, but it showed up in this one data set. So we just wanted to let you know. And then just radio silence, right? It's like they didn't release any data. They didn't release any graphs or charts or anything. They just closed shop. It was a long weekend. And I was like, just from a I don't know, a data management perspective, I mean, are you trying to make people confused? Right? Like, hey man, we might give you a stroke. Peace. Like you're not going to follow up with anything. Nobody's going to come and give you a press conference. Nobody's going to say, this is what we detected. These are the rates. These are to the best of my knowledge, I kind of went digging a little bit. There's no numbers or data. It was just sort of a little press release that was like, hey, we might give people strokes. We're not really sure. Have a great weekend.
So the FDA put this out?
Yeah, it was the FDA. So, I mean, they need to work on their communication, I think, is a nice way of putting it.
That's quite interesting. Would that cover them, like, from a legal perspective, that they put that out? Or like, I guess I don't know, but it seems odd to me. Well, for one, I have not really been paying much attention to any of the boosters. Like, I don't even know what number we're on. I think there's a lot of people that got it. Well, I got it because the initial vaccines, because I wanted to go places. But now I'm like, well, one, I already had it, and two, I got vaccinated, so I'm like, I feel like I'm good based on the information that is existing. So I've kind of stopped paying attention. And I feel like a lot of people have also done that.
Agreed.
So
I mean, I think I looked at the The bivalent booster uptake rates are something like 12% nationwide compared
compared
to
to what, like
the
70% or whatever for the initial
I think the initial was
rollout?
in the 90s. Like I think it was in the 90s when it was all
Was it
said and done.
really?
Yeah,
Oh, damn.
the initial series.
Um,
Now, I mean, that still leaves a lot of people, right? There's 330 million people, so 10%
no, of
is
course.
30 million people. But
Of course, but that's like percentage wise, like that's for something to get rolled out that quickly and have 90% of the country take it. And also, by the way, for those listening, if we don't actually know what the numbers are, we are going off memory. So if somebody wants to, don't get mad at us. If you know the number, just put it in the comments or whatever. We're not preaching gospels. We are having a conversation. Yeah, so the reason I bring that up is because I would have had no idea that that was a thing. And I don't, because if it was like a little thing on a Friday before a long weekend that nobody cares about, and then people get it and have strokes, then can they say, like, oh, look, we told you on this thing here?
yeah, I'm not sure.
Like,
I'm not
because
sure what the liability of the FDA is.
if they wanted to tell people, surely they would have done something that isn't what they did. As Twitter, I didn't even see it on Twitter. And I went on Twitter a little bit this weekend, a little bit more than normal, like when we were waiting in the locker room preparing for the game or whatever, and we're there 2 hours early, just killing time, whatever. I didn't see anything about it, which is like, and I follow enough people from all realms of who I would have thought would have seen that, or said something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope the reason we haven't heard about it is it's people being careful, right? Because there's no data. It was sort of a weird press release with like there's not much to comment on other than they said this is happening and they gave you no data to assess, right? So like you can't make an independent judgment because there's nothing to judge.
You would think, but people still find ways.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not people you follow too closely. That's
No,
right.
That's true. But what's interesting about it is, for me, when Damar Hamlin collapsed, everyone immediately, or not I shouldn't say everyone. There was a lot of people who were like, whose brains went, "Is it the vaccine?" Which I thought was odd, because if that had happened a year ago, I don't think that would have been the case.
Yeah.
It's just strange. And now for me, like at practice last week, one of my teammates kind of like, we were scrimmaging, and he kind of like took a short breath and like was like, and everybody immediately was like, "Oh my God," which like,
Yeah, sure.
but it was very unsettling, because like we're like, this dude's in shape, obviously, and we've known him for a while. Like,
yeah, I mean, how many miles do you guys run in a week?
I don't know,
On average.
lots,
Right? Like 20
so,
plus?
yeah, and probably including outside fitness and stationary bike and other forms of physical activity or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
we don't track it as like runners do, but yeah, probably like if you play an outdoor game, you run 6 miles, 7 miles maybe, depending on the pace of play. Pros will run like 7 to, they'll get up into like the 12 kilometers.
Yeah.
So like I think the most I run in a game is like 6 3/4 or something like that, and
yeah,
the least I run in 90 minutes is like high, like mid fives, something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
So that you guys are in good shape, right? I mean, the average
yeah,
person's not doing 10 miles a week.
no, yeah, for sure. So like, it was very unsettling, because our coach was like, "Don't die in my dude. Then I have to schedule a like tribute match for you." I was like, "Bro," but it was unsettling that everyone's first like, because that was, I think, Hamlin collapsed on like a Sunday, and that was like the Wednesday after. So everybody's mind immediately went like, it was very, very unsettling. And I told you about it, and I was like, part of me was like, "Oh, I'm just freaking out," but then the other part of me is like, "No, it's not just me either."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so let me ask you this. What's your impression of, the post-vaccine myocarditis rate? If you had to ballpark a number, out of how many let's say your age group, right?
One out of how many people have it?
Yeah, like how many people get a detectable
Oh,
myocarditis signal
I don't
post
know.
second dose?
Probably like in the single digits of percents. I would think
Mhm.
maybe below 25 for sure. Like
Yeah.
I was 5 to 10 maybe, if that.
So the published numbers, and these are not strictly speaking from sort of like FDA numbers, but from New
Uh-huh.
England Journal of Medicine and a couple papers, is in the sort of 19 to 35 age bracket for males, it's something like 1 in 10,000.
Oh, so
So
lower than that. So what, like 0.001% or something like that?
yeah, something like that. So now, to be fair, that's detectable clinical level activity, right? That's not subclinical activity that doesn't have symptoms at the time, and so you don't measure, right? Like not most people are not walking around getting an EKG every 2 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. So let me follow up with this then, because I know you're not a cardiologist, but you understand how like the sciencey papers are written and stuff. So
Sure.
like how much activity would be required for like I guess the question is if the my understanding is basically it's kind of scarring in the heart that then it performs slightly less optimal. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I mean, so the myocarditis is inflammation of the heart, right, which
Uh-huh.
leads to the scarring. The scarring is the
Okay.
leftover effect.
So how
Or
much
pericarditis, right? It's similar inflammation of the sac around the heart, right? So it's anything with
yeah.
itis is inflammation.
Yeah. So how much, right? So you say detectable, but then how much activity is then required to make that become like a big problem? Because I get the impression like most a lot of people don't strain their hearts in the way that like
Yes.
I would during like an arena game.
Yeah.
So how much of that is actually an issue? Like at what? And there's not going to be one answer because it'll differ for people. But like,
Yeah.
so you have 1 in 10,000 that have detectable, but of that detectable amount, how much?
Well, and detectable by the person, right? So like by the individual person going, "Hey man, there's something wrong." And so they go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Oh, so then that's
not
even less.
detectable by like
Well,
yes, yes,
so I
yes.
think there would be more people than that actually have it then. So the
Almost
percentage,
guaranteed. Yeah.
yeah, so the percentage would be higher, but then how much? So how much of somebody who doesn't detect it, right? They're just walking around, they don't notice a difference, and then they strain their heart because they're
Hmm.
working out, running, whatever.
Yeah.
Where is that line where it's like now this is a problem? In normal life, it's not a problem, but now it is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know is the short answer. I mean, I think we'd have to get a cardiologist on board to really hash it out. I mean, I imagine most cardiologists would say they don't want to see any, right? You just don't
Oh,
want.
of course.
But right, how much do you need to get so that it affects peak function and it leads to potentially fatal downsides, right? I don't know is the short answer.
So
Um,
that's interesting to me as well because I know. Uh, so I'm gonna tie this in a second. But did you see somebody came out with like a new diet poster thing on like
oh
what
yeah,
is healthy and what's not, and like
was it the
um
kid one?
yeah, and Lucky Charms was rated healthier than like a steak, which
Yeah,
is absolutely mind-boggling.
yeah,
Um, but for diet and like heart health and stuff, and you know Huberman, right? The Huberman Lab.
yep,
Yeah, so he'll say things like heat exposure in the sauna or whatever is like this percentage better for heart function, or I don't know what the exact number is. He has a whole episode on it. Um, but then we look at something like that where I, in all the things that I know about diet, whoever put that out and thought I'm gonna go find it, but
yeah,
find the chart because I remember looking at it and I was like, this cannot possibly be real.
yeah,
And if we're
yeah,
trying to be healthy, like I don't know. Like what are we doing? I don't understand.
yeah,
I really have, and so part of it I think comes from the different diets work for different people, right? You got dudes that are like on the carnivore diet because it helps with inflammation, blah blah blah. Let's
sure.
see. Okay, like Good Rancher. So who Good
Yeah,
Ranchers is who did it? Wait, that doesn't make any sense. No, Good Ranchers.
Well, we've all seen the one from the 90s, right? From when we were kids.
Yeah,
Right?
well,
It was
that one is
grains and pasta
bonkers.
on the bottom. Right? That was the thing you should eat the most of is grains and pasta and cereal.
Yeah, let me see if I can figure out who actually did. So Good Ranchers posted it as like this is nonsense, but this is to be in. It's categorized into to be encouraged, to be moderated, to be minimized. Ground beef is at the bottom of the list, the most to be minimized thing. At the top, you have watermelon, kale, and then frosted mini wheats, chocolate covered almonds, honey nut Cheerios are all in the to be encouraged section.
What?
Lucky Charms is like it's on a scale of like 100. So the cutoff for to be encouraged is like 70 or whatever, and then 30 is the other cutoff. So Lucky Charms is 60.
I mean, I agree with that just on a 1 to 10 ranking. Right? Like I'd rather have
canned pineapple and heavy syrup is 51.
Yeah.
Almond M&Ms is 43 and ground beef is 26.
Yeah.
Checks out.
Well, it's wild, right? Like, I mean, this is in an era where we talk about misinformation every 5 seconds. I found some, but that's misinformation. Like, that's insane. That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. And like the food pyramid from the one you're talking about from the 90s, it's like carbs aren't necessarily bad. However, eaten in the forms that they show on the pyramid is not great for you, especially if you're not doing the amount of exercise. Like carbs, if you're just sitting around, is not good for you.
Sure, yeah.
Because you need to expend the energy. I eat carbs because then I go run. Yeah. But like I don't encourage like if somebody who I know they lift once or twice like they lift a couple times a week and maybe they go for one run. Yeah. And they're like, "Hey Eric, what do you eat?" I'm like, "You shouldn't eat what I eat because we do different things." Yeah. And that's not bad or good. It just is. Like if you're lifting 5-6 days a week and not doing as much running, you should be eating more protein than but like on a very simplified level. But like nutrition is I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, it's you know, it's an overused phrase, but it's not rocket science, right? I mean, it's calories in and calories out. It's just math, right? It has to balance in one direction. And if it doesn't, then you're in trouble. And like certain foods get you more calories and less filling, right? Like it's not hard. It's more of like addiction behavior, right? So like I it's funny that you say, so I did Noom, right? So in between the time I was first on the podcast and now.
Explain to those listening what Noom is.
Noom is like it's a weird mix of a calorie counter and like a therapist in an app all at once. And so, I mean, I lost 50 pounds, but it was mostly, yeah, right? Feels good. But it was mostly like noting, hey man, why are you doing that? Right? Like at least for me, right? A lot of my eating had gone on autopilot. So like I'm not even paying attention. I'm just, doing this, doing that, doing this, and like had a bunch of bad habits, right? Like it was stuff like, you've been conditioned from as a child to clear your plate, even when you're full.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it would do little exercises like, hey, just try to leave like 2 bites of food on your plate and feel if you feel a pull to eat it. Right. And just be aware of that moment when you go, I'm not hungry. Like, I mean, like rationally, 1 bite is not the difference between me being hungry and not hungry. Right.
Yeah.
What is this pull to eat this last bite? Right. Like, so it was all stuff like that of being like, hey, just be more conscious. But the calorie counting side, they did sort of a similar thing. It was like a red, yellow, green system. And they just pointed out, there's a lot of things that are calorie dense and they're not that filling and you're just going to eat again. You're going to be hungry again. And there's stuff that's, calorie, low on calorie, but fills you up. And that you should just try to kind of, invert the scales in that direction.
Yeah.
But it wasn't stuff like the diet stuff wasn't stuff that wasn't obvious. It just was more like to do it was more of a conscious effort. But it is weird to me when I see stuff like that where it's like, yeah, just have, a whole bunch of Honey Nut Cheerios and frosted mini wheats. Like that's where it's at. That's like what, like 300 calories per cup?
I don't know. I don't buy them.
I mean, it's gotta be.
Yeah, like let's Google that. I'm gonna Google that right now. Keep going.
Yeah, but like that's a dessert, right? Like that's ice cream. That's like the same calorie intake as ice cream. But it's not going to be that filling.
So Lucky Charms calories per serving, 110. Now, how
What's
big is this?
serving?
3/4 of a cup.
Like, come on, that's
Yeah,
how much? How many cups fit
nobody's
in a
eating
bowl?
that. Let's
2 or 3?
we'll Google that too. How many cups in a bowl? 8.
Right, right. Like, okay, so
So
it's
that's
800
like,
calories.
yeah, 800 calories. There you go. Yeah, it's insane. It's insane and is very frustrating. Because there's also a weird thing where like people will make fun of you for eating healthy. Like for the longest time when I was in the office full time before COVID and I would bring lunch, I'd have like a wrap that was like a spinach wrap or whatever. Because it's easier to transport, and I was kind of like, this is the lowest thing on carbs and other nonsense. It's not filled with like chemicals and whatever else.
Yeah.
And then fill that with meat, basically whatever, chicken, salmon, tuna, whatever it was, and then just tomatoes, lettuce, etc. People are like, "Oh, you got your lettuce sandwich again today?" And it's like, no, incorrect. Right, but it's weird. It's weird when that happens, or like you're out to dinner with friends, you're like, "Ah, he's gonna get a salad again," like,
Yeah, right.
and
It's wild.
So you try to eat healthy, and then you've got your friends that either don't care or they're just like poking fun or whatever, like, "Oh, you're so boring, you eat salads." And so
Do you think that's?
it's
Oh, go
really
ahead.
hard for people to start a diet and then have to deal with that from, or not even start a diet, but just try to like pay attention to what they're eating, and then to have their friends or people around them basically make them feel horrible about it. Like, that's not fun.
Do you think that's maybe not jealousy, but like, is it that you're pointing out that like, hey, this is how I should eat, versus like, oh, Eric's kind of making me feel bad because he's over there doing what I should be doing, and if he didn't do that, then I could just pretend that eating that steak was fine, or not like the steak, but like, eating 5 steaks and 3 bowls of Honey Nut Cheerios was going to be fine today.
Yeah. I don't know, because I do it to Tommy as well, because Tommy's super jacked and I make fun of him for only eating chicken. But
well, there's some part of it that's just ribbon on friends, right? Like,
yeah,
that's
so it's that part, but I think the other part, yeah, it's probably, I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast with Manny that went out today at time of recording, and it's kind of like that is a very obvious way to have somebody, not on purpose, but just put your own shortcomings right in your face.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. That's hard to deal with. Sometimes it's that, I think. Other times could be jealousy. I don't know. I think it depends on the person probably, but and I think it's probably that. It's like, yeah, I should be eating like this. Now I feel bad, but I still want my burger and fries instead. And it's really weird because then I'll have people ask me like, "Oh, are you on a specific diet?" And I was like, "No, I just will get a side salad instead of fries, or I'll get fruit instead of hash browns or pancakes as a side at like IHOP or whatever, or like things like that." Like, it's not that complicated. It's just like I pay the extra $1 or $2, and it's not that complicated. But and because like when you're at a restaurant, you look at the menu. It's very easy just to be like, yeah, I'll take this instead of that.
Yeah.
And people know that they should, but they're like, John Mulaney has a good bit about it. Or I don't know if it's John Mulaney or somebody else, a comedian. He's like, are we getting a plate of fries for the table? And like everybody has to like look around and like, okay, I guess we'll get a plate of fries. And then they get, and then they like, are we doing margs? Are we doing margs? And then they all get margs. And it's like, it goes from there. And then by the end of the night, they're wasted in a Taco Bell parking lot. And it's like, that's like 3,000 calories right there. And then, yeah. So I don't know.
Well, it's funny too, because that was one of the ones that like, that was a good Noom psychology tip for me. Was it one of the questions was, next time you're eating like fries, right? Just assess how much joy and enjoyment did you get out of the first fry and compare it to the last fry. Right? Like somewhere in the middle, you're like, I'm not enjoying this anymore, but I'm still doing it.
Yep.
Right. Like, I'm just sort of on autopilot. Right. And I was like, yeah, this is actually a good point. Like, I enjoy 2 or 3 fries. And then after that, it kind of drops off.
Yeah.
So I'll just steal a few from my kids.
Yeah. Dad tax.
Right? Like that's dad tax. And that's what we've been doing too with the kids, right? So we've got the littlest one is about a year old, and now she's started to eat if we go out. So of the 3, we'll get 1 fry and 2 fruit cups, right? And so I'm like, all right, between the 3/4 of us, everybody can have a few fries. But the biggest thing on the table is the side salad and a fruit cup and, side of broccoli or so, like stuff like that.
Yeah. Getting them into the habit of doing that early is so important, because by the time they get to the point where somebody's like, oh, they're getting a salad again, it's not like they're just like, yeah, duh, this is what I've always done. So they don't. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of combat that thing that happens. Also, like soda, like even diet soda with no calorie. Like I will not drink soda unless it's mixed with alcohol. Like I will not touch soda otherwise. And I made that change when I was in high school, and like almost immediately I was like not missing it. So instead of soda, I would have like a Propel or something, like something that still had some flavor, right? Because part of it's the flavor, but I think almost immediately, like, not that I was fat when I was in high school, but like a little bit of the extra like fudge that I was carrying around just like dropped off right away. And so soda's another big one. It's like my high school coach was huge. He was like, he saw somebody get soda at a Chipotle once. He was in line like behind us, and he sees us, but we didn't know he was there. And we both get texts, me and my teammate, and he says, "Communists," and we're like, "What?" He's like, "I saw you get soda." I was like, yeah.
How is that a communist thing?
I don't know. It's like he's a French dude that's old, and I don't know. Probably had no relation whatsoever, but it was
the fact
funny.
That you got food was pretty clearly not a communist thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't get food.
Ooh, boom roasted. Got him. Got him. Yeah, but soda's another big one. It's like, there's no need for that. Like, there's no need for that. Yeah, it tastes good, but like, does it really? Then you're bloated afterwards because all the bubbles and whatever. And it's not even like, what does it give you? Literally gives you nothing. Yeah. Like, there's no nutritional value. And half the reason I can't drink it straight anymore is because I'm like, oh, it's so sweet. It just feels sticky and gross afterwards.
It's like
now.
Too much, isn't it? Like,
but the other thing, once you stop doing all those things and break all those habits, like I can't go back now. If I eat if I don't eat well for a day or two, I feel like garbage. And I'm like, I'd rather not feel that way, so I just don't do it.
No, I agree. Like once I sort of broke a lot of those, like the price to get back in is real high, and I'm not interested in it.
No. And then you realize once that happens, you're like, yeah, I shouldn't have been eating all this in the first place. My body was just used to it. And then you're like, wow, that wasn't good. Like, I was putting all these things in, and then the other thing I started doing recently with protein bars specifically and protein powder was looking at the ingredients list. And even like, so I use these things I eat these things called RX protein bars now, and they only have.
Future sponsor?
No, I wish they were. I wish they sponsored me. But like, so on the thing, so they don't taste well. Let me rephrase. I think they taste fine. Jenna hates them. But like the peanut butter chocolate one has 3 egg whites, 14 peanuts, 2 dates, and that says no BS. But then it's got some like chocolate chips in it and whatever, and it's like you can tell there's not nonsense in it. But like that's it. So when you look at the thing. And see, that's kind of the price you pay, that it doesn't taste as good as the other ones. That's the price you pay for having that ingredients list. Because then you look at the other one, and there's so many chemicals in there, and you're like, what does all that mean? It's like reading off like the periodic table of food. It's like, it's nonsense. It's like, because nobody knows what half the stuff is. I could just button mash on the keyboard, and I could make an ingredients list for a protein bar, and nobody would know the difference.
Well, and I wonder too, like, what's the threshold? I don't know what the threshold of how much is in it before you don't have to write an ingredient. Or like if it's 1% of the ingredient, is it 0.5%? Like at some point there's got to be a threshold. Like, okay, you don't really have to write this on the label.
Yeah.
But So like I wonder if the labels are worse than we even know.
Probably.
Right? Like it's just I don't know what the rule is, but if it's not like peanuts or some allergen, there's probably some cutoff.
Yeah. And I spent time like Googling what all the chemical stuff was.
Mm-hmm.
I looked like an idiot in the grocery store. I didn't sit down, but like there was like a stool that somebody was using to like get to the top shelf like
Yeah.
before, and I sat on the stool and started just Googling stuff right next to like the protein section.
Yeah.
I was there for like 10 minutes.
It's
Um,
it's good curiosity though, right? Like to go, hey, what's in
yeah.
this? And like, I mean, I do find it's always an interesting exercise. Like you can see when you get that feeling like you've called somebody on their homework. And you go,
Mhm.
hey, what's in this? And they go, I don't know. Why are you asking? What do you mean you don't know? Like, like you
Yeah.
made it. What do you mean you don't know? That's the
Yeah. And yeah, I don't it's tough. Like that initial period of research into like what's good and what works for you is really hard because you have to
Mhm.
try stuff and you have to like do the research. And then once you figure it out, like then it starts to get easier because you just know. And so you
Yeah.
just change how you shop. Like for me, I eat pretty much the same thing almost every day up until dinner. And then, well, lunch and dinner are kind of the same. I just make whatever meat that I have and then the
Mhm.
vegetables or whatever.
Yeah.
And then kind of like sort that out throughout the week and sometimes later for lunch the next day or whatever. But it makes it easier to do that.
Yeah.
Also, groceries are getting very expensive now and I don't like it.
I know. It's
Like
wild, isn't it?
18 eggs at Target was like $8 and I was like,
Did you see those prices from New York?
no.
It was like $9 for a carton.
For 12?
Yeah, for 12. Right, like it was nearly $1 an egg.
Holy shit. Like that's not even and I noticed that also at restaurants like
Yeah.
Potbelly, a big rec is $16 now.
Yeah.
And I remember it used to be like 10
Yeah.
or 9. Um yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan. Um to say the least.
It's a-
To
well stated.
thanks, Captain Obvious. Yeah, it's just I don't know. It's been a goal of mine to find a finance person
Mhm.
to and bring them on here. Not somebody like me or you that pays attention to finance, but like we know enough to like get ourselves in trouble.
Yeah.
Um, but somebody who actually like lives in that world
Yeah.
and
What level
like
of finance are
really
you talking? Like personal finance or
nah, like explain to people what the Fed is doing and why like
gotcha.
okay, they raised interest rates. Why? And inflation is doing this because why? And like we have the basic answer. Well, it's because we just printed like a gazillion dollars in the last 2 years, and obviously that means supply and demand. The dollar's worth less. Like, is it
Yeah.
actually that simple, or is there more to it? Like, I
Yeah.
have no idea. Like, part of me feels like there's more to it because
Yeah.
why would they have jobs?
Well, but I mean,
Well,
to be
they shouldn't
fair,
have
right?
jobs anyways. Libertarians, woo.
There you go, right? But like I think a lot of people their eyes gloss over, right? Which is weird to me. Like if
Is it
some
though?
it is and it isn't. Like is that not impacting your life in a meaningful way, right? Like are prices going up not making it so you go, I don't know about that vacation this year, right? Like is that not?
That's
It seems
happening
like it's not. It seems like at least there's a lot of people going, well, I guess we're all tightening our belts, and nobody's going, yeah, but why? Why are we all doing this? Like,
because that requires energy to think, and
yeah, like
thinking
it's
is hard.
yeah. I don't get it. I don't. It's one of those things where I'm like, nobody's just going, hey, why do we have to do this? Like, I don't. Why does the dollar do that? Like, why do things go up? And then you hear people doing the like, well, it's corporate greed, and you're like, well, so companies just got greedy now? They
Yeah.
weren't greedy last year or the year
No,
before. Like,
no,
they
no,
were
no. They
not
were
greedy.
very generous.
Yeah, that's not what was happening. They've totally, completely switched gears. They were Captain Altruist up
Yeah.
through 2018.
Yep. Then they learned
Okay.
from FTX.
Right, this kind of like explanation, like this falls apart on its face in like 2 seconds of going, no, I'm older than 5. So
Yeah. No, is very is yeah, I don't know. It's tough to like because even me just on the thinking is hard thing. I was doing the real estate class. I haven't touched the real estate class in like 3 months just because I've been busy with other things, and I'm like, this is kind of hard and it's boring and I don't care that much. Like, but it's stuff that I need to know for future things, even just buying my own, like our own house.
Yeah.
But everything starts to get very complicated very quickly when you realize, okay, well, this is connected to this, and then if these rates are affected by that thing, then that thing is affected by that thing over there, and then you have to like follow the whole trail, and then it's like the trail will fork, and there'll be like this thing is affected by those 7 things over there, but if that guy doesn't do that one thing, then this one thing of the 7 won't do that, so that part won't be affected, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it's easier just to not, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I think we talked about that before, but it's easier just to not like to have your one thing that you know about a thing and say that thing, because people don't sit down and talk like this.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So there's no need to know more than the elevator pitch, because you only see people in the elevator and then you just go off to your whatever you're about to do anyways. So there's no need to think like this.
Yeah.
From in most, like, this is an active choice that both of us are partaking in.
Yeah.
When we would have been doing, well, maybe we're bad examples, but like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I mean, we could be sitting just watching TV. That's what a lot of people are doing, right? And whatever, more power to you. But it's you're making a choice, right? That's in the choice has a price, but like you said, we could not be digging into these things. You could just go, oh, okay, I guess that's what it is. On we go.
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, like I said, I've got 3 kids. I'm running around like a crazy person most of the time. Is like the amount of bandwidth available for digging into certain things
doesn't exist for
it's
most
pretty
for a lot
low,
of people.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're trying to juggle a job, your kids are talking to you, they want to tell you about their day, you got to get them to activities, and other people too, right? Like you've got, you're going to soccer, you're doing your PT, you're you got to spend time with wife, right? Like your day is full.
Yeah. I'm super lucky that she's also curious enough to, like, if I'm musing about something, she'll listen and ask questions. She's not as into it as like I am, but she listens to Huberman fairly regularly. So we'll do it the other way, where she'll be like, yeah, Huberman said this thing, and then I think these 4 things about it. And like, so I'm very lucky in that aspect. But yeah, the bandwidth is not there. Like, NFL playoffs, I think they're on. I just got a notification that they're on. Most people would rather be watching that.
Yeah.
And so this comes at the price of, like, I didn't even know who played yesterday.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so does that affect me when I go into work and people are like, oh, did you watch the game? Like, no, because then there's a social price to pay for that a little bit also, which is something that people, I think is very, it's an unconscious, I don't think people like realize that there's like that part exists. And I also think, just more broadly speaking, that social thing doesn't really exist anymore, because there's so many shows on so many streaming services and so many platforms. Like, people aren't watching the same stuff as they used to. Like 20 years ago, it's like, oh, you watched a football game, okay, there might have been one NBA game on, and then like Friends was on after the game, and then like that's what, no, did you see that one episode of that one thing that comes out once a week? And now people will watch like the entire show in one weekend.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that, because I mean, at least I found at work there's sort of a small niche of people who have similar interests to me, right? Like, so we still have those conversations, but it doesn't revolve around sort of the general water cooler stuff, right? It's, hey, did you see this niche show that like we were really into, and like nobody else wants to even touch with a 10-foot pole, but like we binged it, right? And I found like 3 people who will talk about it.
And that's cool, and people are adjusting to that, I think. Slowly, because I think a lot of people are like, surely nobody else has watched this one random show that I found like on the like the bottom of the recommended feed after I watched this one other thing that nobody knows about. And so they don't want to talk about it and risk like the, hey, did you see this thing? No.
But yeah, right. Like,
why would you watch that?
right.
Because that's not
No,
fun either. Same thing, but it's kind of going into the YouTube and podcasting as well, right? Like Huberman, Rogan,
hmm
the like the comedy ones, like Flagrant,
yeah,
are kind of like becoming a little bit more like out there.
yeah.
Um, but yeah,
I mean, I am both intrigued and sort of terrified by that aspect of humanity. Like, I imagine it evolved from a bandwidth problem. Like, it would be interesting to talk to like an evolutionary, biologist or psychologist about this. Of like, why do people just accept sort of general opinions, right? Like, and how do they not know they've done it? I'm sure I've done it on things, right? Like,
yeah, of course,
usually it's my wife who catches me and goes, "Why? What about this?" And you're like, "Oh, yeah, no, that didn't make sense." But like, I had this conversation with my nephews the other day. Speaking of niche topics,
Hmm.
so they we have this ongoing debate that what is the best Zelda game, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I have not played any of them since like I guess I played Wind Waker, maybe Twilight Princess, but like that, like there's like been several since then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have fun needling them and telling them that Zelda 2, which is an NES game, is the best game. And they tell me that whatever the newest one they played is the best game, right? Like it's sort of an
Sure.
ongoing, ribbing contest between nephews and their uncle, right? And one time independently, I have two nephews, right? So within the same kind of party, we were over like having dinner or something. They both told me that they thought Zelda 2 was the most overrated and not ambitious enough game. And they both used those words. And I was like, huh, well, that was weird. Right? There was a glitch in the matrix. Like, why did you both use that exact sentence? And so then I said, well, why do you think that? And they go, well, it just is. And I was like, but why? What about it is overrated? And they're like you watched sort of the gears kind of burn out. And I was like, so you watched, I was like, I kind of pieced this together. I was like, you watched a list.
Yeah.
Somebody on YouTube said this about this
Yep.
game, and that's it. Right? Like the end. Right? Like but it was a weird like moment where I was like, it was a weird glitch in the matrix moment of like, I think I just saw the same cat walk back twice. Like what just happened? I don't even
Yeah.
know you guys knew those words. So
Well, they didn't either.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, right.
yeah, that's super funny.
But it's
And
wild to
that's
see like opinions dropped in, right? Like that
Mhm.
was an opinion dropped in their head from somewhere that they just adopted and on they went. That
Yeah.
was
And the interesting piece about the YouTube thing, like for video games, it doesn't really matter because it's whatever. But when you've
mm,
got when everyone can go have an opinion, like us on
mm,
this,
which are
there's
all
no,
correct.
of course, we're never wrong. um, like to have somebody be valid. So you've got people. So to go back to the COVID thing, you got people like Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Peter McCullough and like these
Sure.
guys that have the degrees, have the papers and whatever to the
hmm
credentials. People are like, no, they're not credible. Why?
Yeah.
And then you got some news anchor on Fox that's saying that the vaccines are going to kill you. And then you got somebody on MSNBC saying you will never ever get COVID ever if you take the vaccine and you must get 18 boosters. But
Yeah.
people listen to those two, but then people go to the scientist people, they're like, no, they're not credible because our scientists said you're not. And
Yeah.
so you got people just all over saying things and saying that they're right
Yeah.
because they're right, because they say
Yep.
they're right.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be an issue that we're going to have. Like the issue of filtering through information is like, I feel like they should like teach a class on that because, or like how to discern. Because I'll listen to all these people, scientists, whatever, and I'll be like, okay, that makes sense to me, and that doesn't,
hmm
and I don't understand that part. So let me go ask Chris because he's a scientist, or let me,
hmm
or like two coaches of soccer, like soccer teams, like, well, I think the game went this way, and then I think the game went that way, and it's like, no, I think the game went maybe half the way that you said it, and half the other guy, like,
Yeah.
and if I don't know, like, I'll ask somebody else, or like somebody else read something about nutrition or PT, and I have people that work in that field that I I'm friends with, and I'll be like, hey, is this true? Or like, how does that work? And that's something that I just do. It's a learned practice.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt the need to do that because I just naturally don't. One person says one thing. Okay. Therefore, true. No.
Yeah.
Because we've figured this out that just because like I have a degree in geography.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess technically that makes me like a geographer. But like
Yeah.
I haven't done any geography in like 6 years. So like
Yeah.
so I have the piece of paper that says so.
Mm-hmm.
But like what does that mean? So filtering through it is becoming interesting, and then like filtering through who's credible and who's not, and who has a degree in what, and like are they still using it? And so I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, it does. I mean, back to our bandwidth problem, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of it too, is like I just don't have the time for most people to learn about everything. And so I pick a couple experts to do my my processing for me who I trust.
Mm-hmm.
But there was did you watch the Patrick Bet David thing with Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah, the whole thing. That was a good one
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson got his lunch ate like right in
He
front of
did.
him.
He
Right?
also
Like,
said his stripper name was Dark Matter, and that
yeah,
was funny.
that was pretty funny. I actually laughed at that one. I was like,
Yeah.
touche. But it's funny because you can. The only note that I've flagged when kind of listening to those things is that is when somebody's making a scientific argument and when somebody's making a not scientific argument, right? Like they're bringing data and they're bringing numbers and they're bringing facts when they're speaking in a scientific realm. And then when they're just sort of bullshitting and they're being something else, you'll notice that they switch gears, right? They're not going to talk about, it's a 1 in 10,000 rate for myocarditis. Like that's the data from the New England Journal of Medicine. Now we can discuss what that means, right? Like, but like, here's the facts that we can kind of work from. Instead, they'll go, well, man, but what about a grandma?
Yeah.
Okay, but like, that's not an argument. That's a weird emotional ploy. Or well, in the case of Neil deGrasse Tyson, well, we signed a social contract. Okay, cool. Not a language appropriate for science, but it's a different conversation. But once you've left science realm, your credentials should stay at the door, but they don't. Right? That like once I start talking about, like you said, geography, my PhD should be left at the door. I'm outside of my realm here. So like, not to say I can't bring data, but I no longer feel like I should be able to do that appeal to authority. And the thing is, when I see people do the appeal to authority, they should be able to back it up. Right? Like you should never be going, well, I'm the scientist. That should be followed up. I'm the scientist, and here's my 5 citations, and here's why I think that, and this study's garbage, and this study's not, and here's why. Right? Like that is a statement, but like just well, because I said so. Okay.
Yeah. And PBD is a sharp guy. So when I listen to him and Rogan are the same, and I've said this many times about Rogan and PBD, this also applies to him. They're curious enough to be like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? And then oftentimes when they're in a situation like that one and whoever the guest is can't, then they push.
Yes.
And that, right, we saw this with Sanjay Gupta on Rogan. I think is probably the most famous example.
That was great. That was a good one.
Yeah, like so he starts to push, and he's got he's got nothing because So Rogan and PBD are not authoritative figures on these subjects, but when they get people who are supposed to be authoritative figures on these subjects, they're sharp enough. They're sharp enough to understand, to not get like eyes glossed over by all the numbers that just happened, and understand to take the big things out And then to be like, that concept doesn't make sense. Can you explain it? And most of the time, they're not even trying to play gotcha. They're just curious people.
Yeah.
But then when they figure out that they don't actually have a reason for that thing, then they're like, well, why did you say that if you don't have a reason for that? And then they start to go because they're curious. And so that's why like people are like, oh, Rogan, like they like characterize the listeners of these people into like groups, and it's like,
yeah,
dude, because there's different forms of them, right? There's financial PBD, there's business PBD, there's entrepreneurial, which are like all related but different, and then Rogan, there's like fitness Rogan, there's nutrition Rogan, there's MMA Rogan, there's comedy Rogan, there's like UFO Rogan, like, and these are all like different. There's like they're different. They're just people who happen to be interested in various things and smart enough to ask good questions on it. There's also Iran PBD, which is a very interesting one to listen to. But yeah, so it's like I don't like people don't listen to them because they take every word that they say as like gospel. They listen to them because they ask questions that me or you would also ask.
Well, they're curious, like you said, right? Like they want to know. They want to know, and they want to know why, because they're trying to integrate too. Right? Like, okay, I had this nutrition guy on, great. I had this. Now I'm having an evolutionary biologist on. Let's see how we can mesh these two. Right? Like I've got it now. You're right. Like, how can I integrate this data set into something bigger?
Yeah. When he had Brett on, did you listen to that?
I did. Yes.
Well, it was a couple of weeks ago, I think. Now at this point, what were your thoughts on that? Actually, there's 2 episodes of Rogan that I wanted to ask you about. The first was Brett, and then the other one was, what was his name? It was Peter Zahan / Mike Baker. There's 2.
I haven't done the second one yet.
Okay.
It's on my list, but I haven't gotten to that one.
So thoughts on the Brett Weinstein? Because when I listened to that, I was like, I'm going to die. This for those listening, is going back to the heart stuff with the vaccines. He's an evolutionary biologist. Brett Weinstein is, and he said some stuff on there that was, I don't know if alarming was the right word, but I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I think alarming is a fair assessment. I think, broadly speaking, Brett has detected kind of issues with the way that our FDA is running. Our FDA and CDC are functioning. He's a systems guy. He was originally of the left. I don't know where he is now. He's kind of independent.
Probably still is with how he thinks about things, but just not this version of it. Of the left.
So I do think a lot of his sort of discoveries, there's people who are maybe more in the libertarian bent who are going, that is how that works. But like, so I think he's going like, wow, the FDA is captured. Like, yes, it's not new, but I appreciate that you're coming here. So I think on some aspects, he's detected weird inconsistencies in our data that are not reflective of science, which is something we've talked about kind of repeatedly on the show, right? Is things that don't make sense, and they don't make sense clinically. They don't make sense. Like, the only lens they make sense through is sort of a weird political lens, which is pretty cynical, but it doesn't. So for example, right, there's, I guess we could go down a couple examples, right? So, a large number of European countries have banned the Moderna vaccine, particularly for men under 30, right? They said, you can't get it. We're just not going to give it to our
They did that early on as well, I believe.
They did it early on because they detected the myocarditis signal in their safety set, right? And they said, well, why would we give this to this group when we have an alternative right here, right? We have a Pfizer one, which has less of a safety signal. There's no rational reason from a data perspective, right? We get similar or close to similar protection out of these two. At least that was the knowledge at the time. And the Moderna one has a higher safety signal than the Pfizer one. There is no feasible reason or rational reason to give this to this age group, right? It just doesn't make sense. We went the other way, right? We just push regardless. There was no nothing like that. So like I think he's detected stuff like that where he's going, well, those agencies over there are getting the same assessment I am, and our agency over here seems to have no interest in data whatsoever, right? Like they're pushing something else. And I think even like the Twitter files have released a lot of that, right? Like, instead of engaging with the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, we need to do a PR takedown, right? Like we need to do character
For those
assessment.
listening, can you talk about the Great Barrington Declaration?
Yeah, sure. So that was trying to think who it was. It was Martin Kulldorff, Jay Bhattacharya. There were a couple others that I'm forgetting, and I apologize for that. But basically, they wrote early on in the pandemic that they did not like the lockdown for all strategy. They wanted what they termed focused protection, right? So they said resources should not be spent protecting 20-something-year-olds. Those people should go back to their lives and do what they will. And resources should instead be spent protecting nursing homes and people who are kind of identified as vulnerable. And in the postscript, it's pretty clear who was vulnerable, and we kind of knew that early on. We maybe were highlighting anecdotes to pretend that we didn't know that, but we're now 3 years in. The median age of death is 70 plus with multiple comorbidities, right? Like it's not that it's not infectious and dangerous to a certain population, but to a healthy 20-year-old, it's probably nothing. So the Great Barrington Declaration basically said, anybody who's in the vulnerable set, we should put all our resources towards protecting them. People who are not in the vulnerable set should go back about their lives, right? And that this is more of a sustainable strategy. It's also more in line with previous pandemic, assessment, right?
Mhm.
Rather than sort of a just broad lockdown everybody approach. And so that was their position, right? And they're, like we talked about earlier, they have the credentials, right? I think Jay Bhattacharya was a Stanford tenured epidemiologist. Martin Kulldorff, I think, is also an epidemiologist at an Ivy League school. But the response wasn't to debate them, and it wasn't to engage them scientifically. It was to engage them in a PR campaign. I think the famous FOIA'd email from Dr. Fauci himself was that we need a brutal and quick takedown of these guys, or something like that, right? Like maybe it wasn't from Fauci, but it was to Fauci, right? Like there was an email exchange referencing the Great Barrington Declaration, and it didn't say, hey, these guys are wrong, their sources are off, we've got better sources, let's go talk to them and figure it out in the public square. They said, we need to character assassinate these people and censor them because they're talking stuff we don't want people to hear, which doesn't breed trust, I think, especially once it comes out. And like you said, I mean, I don't, from a rational perspective, they had all the credentials. I don't understand why they weren't let in the door, other than, something not scientific was at work here. It was wearing the sort of the lab coat and body of science, but it wasn't science anymore. It was something else. And I think a lot of people have sort of sensed that current underlying public health for a while at this point, that why didn't other European countries mask children, and why are we masking children over 2? That there's not a lot of data to support this. It's just sort of, and now we're masking into the triple demic, even though there's bodies of evidence that community masking doesn't affect flu.
There's more.
So at least some. So I live up in Boston, right? A bunch of Boston school districts brought back masks for like 2 or 3 weeks post the holidays to avoid the spread of various diseases, and they included on the list RSV, flu, and COVID. And there's no data to support RSV. There's
What's
actual
RSV?
Respiratory synovial virus. It's another kind of respiratory virus. It's more dangerous for kids, like very young kids. It can be a little bit dangerous for it. I mean, most kids get it and walk it off just fine, but there is a subset of kids that get it and they have breathing difficulties and they have to get hospitalized. And for toddlers, RSV beats COVID hands down, like in terms of dangerousness, right? Like RSV is much more dangerous than COVID. But to my knowledge, there's no data on RSV being blocked by masking. So that's a maybe. I don't know, maybe not, but there's no data either way. So to really like push forward, like, well, we know this works. You're like, well, maybe it does. I don't know, but you didn't really look. You just said it did. For flu, there's a whole body of pre-COVID literature that says it doesn't matter and it doesn't help, at least at a community level. masking makes no impact on the spread of flu. And then COVID, the masking literature has been a mess, right? Like it works sometimes, it doesn't work other times. The controls are all wonky. We're comparing schools that were closed to schools that were open. Like it's all just a garbage heap. And I think it's stuff like that, right? So like Brett reads those data and he goes, I think one of the famous studies for CDC pushing masking in schools from COVID was comparing school districts in Florida that masked and didn't mask, right? The problem was a bunch of the masked schools were closed for a fraction of the time, whereas the unmasked weren't. And so you can't spread COVID if you're closed, right? Like they're virtual.
Yeah.
So you can't compare them. They're not in school. Right? Like it's not a fair comparison to go, yep, it was the masking that did it. No, it was that you kept them home. They weren't in the school building. But so that there was like stuff like that where you're like, well, if you're reading this paper, you're going, what are you doing over there? So I think Brett is going through that and then is concerned that there are additional safety signals that are not being reported, which is plausible. I'm just in my particular case, I'm waiting for better evidence other than sort of these anecdotal stories. That's
yeah.
But I don't know that I'll get it. So I don't have a lot of faith that I'll get somebody to dig deep and put it together.
No, I don't know, because I was listening in on a Zoom call that Dr. Fauci happened to be on for. I wouldn't get into the reasons why I was in that, but it's not some big thing. There was a bunch of people on it, like hundreds. It was some like thing. It wasn't just like me and him and one other guy. It's like, but I heard it. I was listening for a bit, and this was a month ago maybe, and he was saying that we're still in a pandemic, and I was like, dude, like I wanted to like unmute the thing and just be like, no, we're not. But like, yeah, so I don't. But to what we were talking about earlier, it's like, no, I don't. Are people still paying attention? Like, I don't. After. Oh, I don't know. I guess sometime in 2022, like I just went back to existing as normal. I feel like most people did that.
Yeah.
So for these people now that are still like, we need to do masks again, or we need to do this and that again, and we're still in a pandemic, like people aren't listening anymore. So I don't understand why they're still doing it. Like, it's like they've lost control of the classroom.
Yes.
In other words, so like, what are they doing? I don't. It doesn't compute in my head. I think Brett is also figuring that out. But some of the stuff that Brett says, I'm like, come on, dude. Like,
yeah. Well, and in some cases, I think he's speculating to an extent.
Sure.
Right? Like,
yeah. He definitely is. Like we've been speculating for this entire hour. So
yeah. So, but that's fine. But yeah, I agree. I think I'm not sure. I don't know if it's a power thing. I don't know if it's a bubble thing. I mean, I'd say I still know a few people who are kind of on like are listening and watching, but they're very few and far between. And I would classify most of the people I interact with here in the Boston area are on the left side of the aisle, and they were cautious, and then they largely either got vaccinated, got COVID, or some combination of the above, and went, okay, that was that, and then off they went, right? Like that was sort of
that's exactly what I did.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, but it like I think you're right. A lot of everybody's just sort of gone, yeah, okay, that was cool, but we're done with that now. But there are, like I said, there's a couple places like in Boston that it was interesting. They didn't officially, to be fair to the Boston school districts, they did not mandate it.
Sure.
They strongly encouraged. And then they said somewhere in the email that like they weren't going to punish people who weren't going to do it. So I've been hesitant because I don't want to drag kids into the mix, but my kids are in private school, so they didn't have to do any of that. We didn't get any emails from their school. But I was curious what the compliance looked like with sort of a softball email like that.
I don't know. I will have to ask Jordan, because he's an assistant principal at one of the schools there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll have to ask him what they're doing. Also,
Yeah.
a side note on his situation for schools there, they are hurting for teachers bad. Like
Yeah.
he's doing his job and subbing for he's teaching and doing his assistant principal job, and I'm like, dude, it's like I would have quit yesterday.
You're like, no, no,
Um,
no. I
but
don't
yeah, I
get paid well
mean,
enough for this.
he's an amazing teacher, and I whoever he has him is lucky to have him.
Mhm.
Um, because I also had, as I'm sure everyone did, teachers that were just like, "Why are you here?"
Yeah.
Um,
And a good teacher
but
is something special, right? Like
mhm,
I'd say everybody has one of those teachers too, of like somebody
mhm.
who they remember and they're like, yeah, they really, they really ignited kind of an interest and a passion.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, I want to move on a bit to the other episode that I mentioned, and I don't know. I don't really want to get into necessarily like the. So this guy, Peter Zahan, is a geopolitical strategist, and he's written some books, and his and he talks on some of our relationships with China, Russia, etc. But one of
Hmm.
the things I wanted to mention was he says this. Oh, and he says this also. Did you listen to the Siddharth Kara one? The guy that goes into the cobalt mines in the Congo.
No, not yet.
That one is nuts. But so I guess I'll summarize that one and then go to the other one. This
Yeah.
guy, Siddharth Kara, he basically figured out, I forgot what job he was doing, but at some point he figured out like he wrote a book. It's called Cobalt Red: How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. And essentially, cobalt is this like mineral or metal or something that is really only in the Congo, but it is in all of the batteries, like my computer, your computer, our phones, like all the
Hmm.
batteries technology. It needs cobalt. And um, for those listening that know about like ethically sourced diamonds and stuff like that,
Hmm.
like this is the same concept, but there's no ethically sourced cobalt because I guess the story was what happened was all the American companies pulled out, so now only China is in there for the
Hmm.
most part. And so we just buy it from China. So we're technically not mining it, but it's still in our supply chain, which is like so for phones, it's not like the amount is not really needed, but the big hit is like electric vehicles
Yeah.
that need a huge amount of it. And you're sitting there like the amount that's needed for an electric vehicle, and then you watch California be like everyone has to have electric or like whatever. I think they banned the sale of non-electric vehicles by 2030 or something. I don't know what the exact law was,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. New vehicles had to be electric, I think, as of 2030 or
yeah,
2035, something like that.
something like it. But one, their power grid apparently can't support it. Two, the cobalt that you need
Yeah.
for the battery, like the amount of one, just environmental problems with the mining of cobalt, but two, the child labor and basically is essentially slavery. Like they
Yeah.
get like $1 a day and like that's all they can do. And these people are mining cobalt in like freaking flip flops.
Yeah.
And it is so easy to ignore from here
Yeah.
because we don't
Sure.
have to worry about it.
Yeah.
But it frustrates me that some guy or some lady will say, I'm gonna try to be environmentally responsible with my Chevy charge no not charger I don't know what volt whatever the
Yeah.
thing is
Whatever. Yeah.
and then just like like people just don't even know and
Yeah.
that's very um Michael Malice said a thing on Lex Friedman's podcast. He's like, I think Americans are very naive to the nature of evil.
Yes.
Um and I also was watching A Christmas Carol, the new one that came out like 2020 or 2019.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah.
Um but that was the thoughts I was having with that also. And I've been thinking a lot, like since Christmas. We watched it before Christmas, and since Christmas, that episode came out. The one with Peter Zahan came out. And the Michael Malice, Lex Friedman episode came out, and they were talking about the Soviet Union and like Russia and Ukraine and like those sorts of things. And the things that we think are problems, like here, are not really problems.
Yeah.
But they affect, like the cobalt thing. It's right here.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just easier to not have to worry about it. I don't know. I definitely recommend people, like, if you got some time, to go listen to it, because very eye opening.
Yeah. Well, I'm about 3 chapters into Malice's book.
The White Pill?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty good. It's good so far. It's dark.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think it's hard. It's hard for people to assess that, and like kind of along the bandwidth issue, but also they don't want to. Like you don't want.
No, why would you?
Right, like it's hard to function knowing some of those facts, right? Like it's hard to, like, today's MLK Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of discussions concerning slavery in the United States and its role in slavery, and that's all well and good, but there's more slaves today than there ever have been.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's in open air slave markets on other parts of the planet, right? Like I looked this up beforehand because I was sort of curious today. There was an NPR report that there's 25 million people who live in slavery, not to mention sort of like more indentured servitude slavery, but that's more than was ever traded in the East Atlantic slave trade. It's more than that in the entire history of it.
Yeah.
So like you said, where's your cobalt come from? Where's your, or to assess, right? Like Germany's going back to coal power plants, right? Like, what are you doing? Like we were told you're doing the good thing, but nobody bothered to fill in the details, right? Like, okay, we're going to get away from nuclear because it's dangerous. Okay, well, what happens when Russia behaves like Russia? I guess we go back to coal, right? Like, okay, well, mistakes were made.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's the things that people choose to care. Part of it's the bandwidth, but like the coal, like the cobalt problem is so much worse than renaming a road.
Yeah.
Like, and it's happening now. And part of it maybe because it's local, like local change. It's easier to impact that. And like,
that's fair.
We literally cannot do anything about the cobalt problem. Like, we can't go to Apple and be like, I want you to make different batteries. Like, no, that's not going to happen. But it just puts things into perspective of like how people don't. I challenge those listening to put yourself into 1933 Germany and figure what would you be doing, and actually think about it.
Yeah.
I've done that. I didn't like the answer.
Yeah.
And it's
especially
not,
if you've got like a family, right? Imagine somebody's threatening your family. Because that's what's really on the chopping block, right? Is your kids might disappear, your spouse might disappear.
Yeah. And it's and then the answer of how did that happen becomes much clearer. How do these things happen? It becomes much more clear. Yeah, it's just I've spent a lot of time thinking about it the last like couple weeks, and it's been I don't really know what it's been. It's been interesting, I guess. Interesting from it pissed me off for like 2 good days when I would walk down the street and I'd be like, you have no idea what's going on in the Congo. It's like, and I was like, this is not productive. This is not helpful. I'm not gonna get anywhere by doing this. And I was like, all right, let me stop. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? There's no answer. I don't have answers, but I'm
Yeah.
interested to know what other people think about it.
No, I do. I think life is a lot more complicated than people like to make it, right? Like we like to make it black and white, good and bad. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys. It's pretty simple, and sometimes it is, but a lot of times there's a lot of gray area in between, and especially on complicated sort of global issues, right? Like I think climate change is a good one. I feel bad, I don't know the guy's name. There's some speech going around from an Oxford comedy club that's kind of clicking around the internet at the moment. It's a pretty good speech. But basically he lays out a point, which is, and it's true of the United States too, which is that he was talking about Britain, but he said Britain is only 2% of the carbon emissions on the planet, right? So if the island of Great Britain were to sink into the sea tomorrow, that would make effectively no difference to climate change. All the people died, all the cars disappeared. It would make effectively no difference to climate change. Just none, right? If you turned everybody's carbon to zero. And he said, it's mainly going to be determined in India and China and other developing, industries, right? Like industrial countries. And he's like, and for people who are parents, they'll sort of understand this math. But if you were given a scenario where your child was pitched into sort of a scenario where they either had to live a horrible life or you could press a button and they would live a better life, that you would be less poor, they'd have better food, they'd have better medical care, they'd have better transportation, they'd have better air. There's not a parent on the planet that wouldn't smash that button so hard they'd break their hand, right? And if the cost was that their child would put out a plume of CO2 every day, there's no parent who would make another choice, right? So like, when we're talking about reducing carbon emissions, we're talking about asking poor people to stay poor, right? Like we're asking them to not undergo an industrial revolution. We're asking them to not, modernize like we are, right? Like I think he said something like in Russia, 20% of the houses have an outhouse, right? Like they don't have internal plumbing, right? Like, are we willing to go back to that? And is it okay for us to ask them to stay there? Right? Like that's like they're people, they have lives, they have kids, they have families. Like the only way out is technology, but the only way out is forward. Like there's no backward here. But a lot of people seem to be putting a lot of effort into backward, right? Of like, well, if we just reduce this, we reduce that. Like you can't. This is a math problem. This is not an emotional problem. If you're not, we were sort of talking about this in other contexts, right? But if you're talking about energy policy and you're not using the word joules somewhere in that discussion, there's a certain, like joules, for people who don't know, it's the unit of energy that you measure electricity in, broadly speaking. You need a certain amount of joules to turn on all the lights in the United States for a day, and all the stuff we do. If your policy doesn't involve stating that number and how you're going to get to it by changing the input, you're not a serious person. You're not really trying to change it, right? Like you don't really have a goal. Your goal is to throw up a Hail Mary and hope somebody else catches it. But if it's dropped, it's a lot of people's lives, not the people making the decisions. They're rich and wealthy. They'll have their Teslas and they'll have their everything, but it's the little people who take it on the chin every time, right? So it's an interesting discussion. I'm hoping Malice will lead me to more of a white pill position, but
apparently it only shows up in like the last chapter.
Yeah. I mean, I think these discussions are good. I think it's good that there's people talking about it and trying to get to answers and real answers and calling out the system. Like I do like that about our current state. I like that it's easy to call a politician out and go, "Hey, this you? Like you said this like 3 weeks ago." I remember when you said that, and that was dumb, right? Like or like that doesn't make sense. Now you're saying something different. Like why? Why'd you change? And I think there's a lot of people still sort of trapped in the system, but I think that's a transition period. I think there's a lot of kind of old, I guess boomer age people who have respect for the institution, and then they let people sort of shield themselves with that. But did you see the FBI put out an MLK note today?
No, but that's ironic.
Right. Right. But the internet just ragged on him left and right, all over, right? They were like, "Hey man, you tried to get this guy to commit suicide. Like that was your agency.
Yeah.
You wiretapped him illegally, and you tried to get him to commit suicide. There's a letter that you sent him that is now circulating the internet again. But now you're gonna so there's at least that sort of irreverence that I think is trying to keep people honest.
Yeah. And that brings me to the Peter Zahan one where he's talking about a lot of these institutions are collapsing and we're going to go through like a big shift because it seems so. He mentioned a lot of things about global trading partners and other things of that nature. And I know enough to understand what he's saying, but not enough to like say it again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, basically, he is of the opinion that the world is probably going to de-globalize, unglobalize, and go more regional again.
Mm-hmm.
And as some of these institutions and things start to like crumble and the generations shift on, because the birth rates are falling in various places, China specifically, like in 10 years, we might see a very different world.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Do you listen to that one?
I haven't heard it yet.
No.
Unfortunately.
It's strange to me because I've often thought like why don't we just like localize it? Like why don't we just try to get food from the farmer that's like down the road and the ones that are at the farmers markets, and why don't we just only buy from them, and kind of we can get the stuff that we can't get from this climate, we can ship it in from somewhere like we've always done. But like
Mm-hmm.
you hear some people will talk about emphasis on like shopping local and supporting small businesses.
Yeah.
And that was a thought that I had. And then he was like, yeah, the world is going to have to do that because of the shift in responsibility of various countries due to a variety of things, sphere of influence, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I think from like a US perspective, I think he was like, we'll be fine because we have the ability to make everything we need here. We
Mm-hmm.
just have other people make it because we can pay them less.
Yeah, that's right. It's cheaper. That's
So I don't really know. It was just something that intrigued me. Yeah, he was basically like, it's going to be the end of the world as we know it, and we're going to have to navigate through this like weird transition period. And I'm because like I don't know if we'll end up in like a Europe Napoleon type era, not Napoleon himself, but like where people are trying to people are trying to get with their ethnicities or tribes, where you end up with like balkanization of different places, and like kind of have already done it, but like the relationships on who's getting what from which people are going to change, and like what conflict is that going to create.
Yeah.
And who's going to try and get power where because such and such opportunity opened up in this place, and if this country vacates because of XYZ trading reasons, like are we going to end up with another war here, and is the US still going to be kind of the global police, and if not, then who goes like kind of part of the argument was like the US isn't really being global police anymore, so the global like if country A sends ships to trade with country B, like we were kind of the ones that were like in like the 90s and the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like we were the ones that were like, yeah, you're fine because like our ships are out there and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But if we're not doing that anymore, then there's no incentive for you to go because who's going to protect that?
It's dangerous, right?
So that's kind of what he's getting at. And I was like, that's interesting. And things are going to get weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is true. I'm not sure if I agree with it. I'll have to listen to get a full assessment.
Yeah.
I think there's sort of two things that I don't see giving way that I think would have to give way for that. So I think one is sort of the American instinct for the cheapest price. Like I think there's
he talks about that because I guess Mexican labor is cheaper. So then China is now apparently.
Fair.
I don't know. That's what he said.
Yeah. Okay. So it's at least a little more local. That's right.
Yeah.
That would be the assessment of there. So, but yeah, maybe that's the case. And then the other one would be, like you said, the instinct to play less of global police. But
he has reasons for that too that I don't remember.
Fair.
He has reasons for both.
Sounds
it
like
was
a good
very
argument.
compelling. It was very compelling. I don't know how much truth, and because some of the things that he was saying, and the reason why I think Joe had Mike Baker on right afterwards is because this guy Peter is not from the intelligence communities and Mike is, and so it was two differing points, two differing episodes, basically back to back. And I was very interested to hear what Mike Baker would have to say about Peter's stuff.
Yeah. Does he answer it?
A little bit. They talk about other things though. It's not a direct like Peter said this thing. What do you think about that? Like they touch on the issues because of the people, and that's what they're experts in. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of the world is so complicated, man. It's so complicated. All these different moving parts, and then at the same time, with like if we have a trade relationship with Mexico, then we've got the cartels that are doing XYZ things, and that's the other thing he talks about. Peter does. He's done a lot of research on the cartels and like which ones have kind of gone away and which ones are starting to take the place, and if they take the place of this one, then we'll be in this sort of situation because XYZ guy doesn't like this other cartel guy, and right now they controlled this region, but if they lose it, then we could end up losing
influence down this way,
influence on that. And it's like all these things that we never have to think about, and then you like take one deep dive into that world, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna leave now.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, because I think too that's the interesting thing about. I mean, I guess some aspect of a white pill I would take is interest in these long form discussions that's growing. Because I do think this is where people start to hash out more of the depth of a situation and can assess more completely solutions. Like I think the talking head 30-second tidbit thing is not designed for that, right? Like it's not designed to get to a solution. I'm going to yell my thing, you're going to yell your thing, we're going to get some clips, but like we're not attempting to reach a solution together, right? And that, like, I think a good example of that one, I remember my wife and I talked about the kids in cages thing under Trump, right? That we all just sort of stopped looking at, but like is still sort of a thing, but we just decided we don't care. But like the question was, we never, in all of the rancor around the situation, like step away from the anger, right? That's fine, whatever. That's a different situation. The question is, what do you do with a kid who shows up at the border if you're not sure they're with their parent? Sex trafficking is a real thing.
Yeah.
You're the border guard. What do you do?
Yeah.
Right? Like you're left with, put the kid in jail with the family or family member. Do you keep the kid out? Do you put the kid in a foster home? Right? Like it's actually a more complicated question than you think about for a second when you go, I mean, am I leaving them with an abuser? Am I leaving them with their family member? Do they have family over it? Right? Like it's a very complicated question. And then it happens thousands of times a day. Right. And so you end up with a policy, and the policy seems inhumane, and that's, maybe it is, maybe it's not. But the actual issue is a little more complicated. Like, well, what do you do with this kid? You, like, they may not speak English. You can have a translator, but is the translator also a therapist and also able to sort of assess like danger signals or not danger signals? Or
and then does the kid trust the translator enough to tell him, or is the translator helping like the cartels smuggle people through because somebody doesn't know Spanish? Like all those things, like you don't know.
Yeah, like it's a complicated situation of what do you do? And so then you end up with, I mean, the way we work, you end up with sort of a binary answer. You know, separate all the kids. Okay. But like it's an attempt at, you know, and I think that was something to do with like a legal case or so. There was some other paperwork there. But the question of having a long form discussion of saying, okay, I'm open to not doing this anymore. What do I do with this kid? Like, are they a citizen? Are they not a citizen? Do they have to wait for asylum claims? Do they get a lawyer? Do they get our lawyer? Do they get a lawyer from another country? And what do I do when there's a lot of them? Like, can I ship them around? That doesn't seem kind of okay, but like, can I move them to other
you
places?
can send them to Martha's Vineyard.
Right, right. Like, it's actually a complicated issue that you would have to dive into in like an hour.
Or more, or days. And have people like, no. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't know
then,
what
like,
the answer
what do you
is.
do with a 15-year-old versus a 7-year-old or an 18-year-old? Like, are they're legal? Like, or a 17-year-old? Like, they are about to be legal, but like they could also not be. And then, like, what if you got like a 5-year-old that can't function by themselves? Like, that's different too.
Or if you've got like a family, like, so like, say you've got 5 kids and one of them seems a little off and the other 4 seem okay. Like, it's just a complicated question, but we pretended it wasn't, right? Like, don't do this. Okay, but what do I do with this person? Like, do I kick them back out in the desert? Do I give them citizenship?
Probably die.
Right. Like, do I just drop them somewhere and assume they'll show up for a court case? I'm not even sure this is their guardian.
Yeah.
I don't know. But like that, to get into that is a lot more complicated than people want it to be. But I like these long form discussions because I think this is where it's happening. I think a lot of people recognize the system as it stands now is dumb and like isn't designed to get to answers, right? Like, one of my good moments was one of the presidential debates where I watched it for like 10 minutes and I was like, if you're not following politics 24/7, you would have no idea when either of these assholes is lying.
No,
there's no way to know. They just say stuff.
Yeah.
Like, like my favorite one is like, it was Trump claiming Biden was pro Medicare for all, and I was like, I mean, he wasn't. You can say a lot of things about him, but he wasn't that. That wasn't his position, right? Like, or like, so, but like, it was that kind of stuff where you're like, I don't know. It's just, if you're not following it 24/7, this doesn't seem productive. You guys aren't trying to get to an answer. You're just trying to win.
Yeah, you should have PBD moderate between them. I'd prefer him over Rogan because I think he'll be much more like short and less tolerant of nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, I don't know. It's just like, I have lots of thoughts on that in general, but it's been an hour and a half, dude.
Do we do
it's late. Huh?
We did a thing?
Yeah, we did the thing. It's been an hour and a half. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah, this is fun.
Got a bit dark for a little bit, but that's all right. Sometimes you got to. If you don't think about it, then it's kind of it's like I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war type deal. It's like, if you don't understand that what's going on in life, like being like somebody's like, oh, he couldn't hurt a fly. It's like, okay, well, that's good because that person hasn't made any moral decisions. Like, they don't know how to
yeah.
And that's a very interesting thing that I've tried to like not model, but like be more aware of, I guess, be stronger in like how to like not be a pushover occasionally on different things. Not that I am, but like, okay, I can stand up for myself better in this situation because I'm capable of doing so. And then that's been quite helpful, I think, in life. But
yeah.
So
no, and I think, like you said, having your eyes open can be hard, but I think it's the only rational path forward, right? Is the only way you can solve a problem is if you're accurately diagnosing it, right? That's so you have to look. Otherwise, you'll come up with some bullshit slogan. Yeah, well, that's what USA runs on at the moment. So great success. Okay, we can always hope. Yeah, we can always hope. All right, guys, we'll see you guys next time. Also, by the way, subscribe. You should do that because that would be helpful. And buy Chris's book. Link in the description. Peace.